for assignment 1B, for the in-betweening assignment, we have two key drawings. We've got a line coming down here, and our second key is drawing number 4, which is this squiggly line here. So basically what's happening is the line is coming in, and it's impacting on the surface right here, which is causing it to scrunch down into this spring type of a look to it. Our timing chart over here tells us where the positioning of the two drawings go for our in-betweens. We've got drawing number 2 and drawing number 3. Drawing number 2 is 1/2 the distance between 1 and 4. So that's always the first in-between that we do. Doesn't matter numerically which order they're in. So there could be a drawing over here in this position, which could be number 2, this could be number 3, and this could be number 4, which would make this number 5. Doesn't mean that we go to number 2 first. We always do the halfway position whenever we're doing an in-between. Right? Halfway always comes first. So in this case here, it just happens to fall in that it's the numerical number that we do. So number 2 is the first halfway position. Now you remember when we did the first in-betweening assignment, where we had the different shapes and circles and boxes and things like that, and I told you to start into the in-betweening, and I paused for a little bit, and then I stopped everybody because I asked the question, what's happening? And that's what you always have to ask whenever you're doing your in-betweens. Whenever you're animating something, you always have to say, what is my character doing? Why is the character doing it? In this instance here, whenever we're doing an in-between, we have to ask the question, what's happening? Why is this happening? And what's causing and affecting the line to do what it's doing, or the shape to do what it's doing? So in this case here, we have this line, and we can see that it's got a path of action that's going in this direction here because the second drawing is right over top of it. And we can see clearly that this line has become all squiggled, so therefore there's the impact point on the ground, and it's scrunched up. So we have to decide what is the halfway point. But we have to ask ourselves, what is this made of? So we'll just assume that it's a little spring and it's falling down. So the natural assumption would be that if you were doing a halfway in between, you would do everything halfway. And so we look at the end point of the line here and the end point of the line up here, and we'd find that halfway position between those 2 points. So here and here, we find the halfway position, which would be roughly about there. Based on the fact that in this drawing here, it's gone to a squiggle, we would simply assume that the halfway point between this contact point here, or this point here, and this point here would be half the distance as well. And that we simply make the squiggle half the distance between a squiggle line and a straight line. So we basically keep it squiggled, but we sort of open it up a little bit more like this. Like that. So when we flip it, we get this type of an effect. Okay. So from a halfway drawing point of view, that's correct. But from a cause and effect point of view, it's not correct. Because if this thing is shooting down into the ground, wouldn't the bottom part start to collapse first, and then it would slowly get bigger and bigger, and then the top part here, not being affected by the ground surface, would that not be caused or still remain straight? Right? So we have to think in terms of why is this happening, when is this happening, and what's the effect going to be? So although this is a halfway in between, which is correct, it's not actually depicting what we really want it to say. So therefore, our correct halfway point would be with this line in the exact same position here, having crumpled into the ground. We would then keep this part here, this curvature, fairly close to what it is, if not right over top of it, because it would have impacted first. Same thing with the second one probably. And then as we move up here, we begin to stretch it out a little bit more. So it begins to open until it gets to a straight line like this. So now the idea is that it impacts hard on this part here, causing all this to squiggle up really quick, and this part here starts to come out. So it's catching up. Okay. So that would be the actual natural effect of that line coming down. Right? So we have to think in terms of what's causing it to do whatever it is that it's doing. So this would be in between number 2. We then take off drawing number 1 because we don't need it, but we need to do our in-between between 2 and 4, which is number 3. So we keep drawings number 2 and 3 down, or 2 and 4 down. blank sheet of paper here. And this will be in between number 3. So number 3 is half the distance between these two here as well. So if you look at the two of them, you can see that the bottom coil down here is exactly the same. So that's just a trace off. You don't change that at all, you just keep it in the exact same position. And then the change begins to take place on the very next coil. The change starts to take place on the very next coil here, where it begins to unfold right at this point in here. You can see there's movement in this section here, where it begins to open up. And so that's where we have to actually place our in-between. Now doing something like this, I'm not using a light in behind. It would be a lot more effective if you did use a light table to make sure that you're being accurate with it. So then again, we look for the halfway point between this line that's right here and in behind this line right here, which is down in this position. We have to find the halfway point between those 2 points there, which would be on this angle here. So every time we draw a little bit of the line like this, we always double check by flipping to see whether or not the action is doing exactly what we want it to do. Now the next point that we need to do is we've got a curvature that's here and the curvature that's there. We need to find that curvature halfway point, which is in around here, right in there. So we draw a little bit of that curvature like that, then we flip it, see if it's doing what we want. Next, we have the curve going in this direction over here, which then falls to this squish position here. There's the curvature right there on this point. So we want to match up this to that in a halfway position, which would be roughly about there. So we draw a little bit of that, and then we flip to see that it's doing what it's doing. And we continue through the process, coming up here. And then we can see that the tip of the line scrunches over there. There's your tip, and it's going to fold over top. But it'll still be dragging at this point here. It's not just going to fold by itself. It'll come down like that and collapse on itself. Right? So that would be the accurate halfway in between. So the purpose of this assignment here is just to get you to start looking at the in-between process and thinking about why is something doing what it's doing. Because in all your animation, as the animator, the key animator, you will be plotting out the major key points and dictating to someone else or yourself later on that this is where the character starts, or this is where this part of the body starts, and over here in the next key position, this is where it stops. And then the question is, how do you want it to move between those 2 points? So you remember before what we had was we had a line over here and a line over here. Do you want that halfway in between to look like this, or do you want it to remain straight, or do you want different parts to delay? So at some point, or at all points in animation, you're going to be presented with this, or you're going to have to create one of these things here, this timing chart that says that this is half the distance and this is slowing in or it's slowing out. And that's really what this really determines in here, is whether it's slowing in, slowing out, going at an even pace, or there's a cushion on it. Those are your major concerns. But the fact that it's the halfway position does not mean that it's mathematically halfway. You have to discern what is the action that's taking place and judge for yourself whether or not it's doing. And then by flipping the drawings, you actually see that it's moving the way you want it to move. So you're always in control. Whenever you're doing your drawing, you're always in control. And you're always stopping to ask questions. So every time you draw a little bit of the line, you flip the drawings, you check to see whether it's working, and you ask yourself, does this work the way I want it to work, or does it not? If it does, you move on to the next part of the line. If it doesn't, you erase it and you correct it right at that point. If you leave that process till the very end, let's say I went through and I did this entire line all the way through without flipping it at all, and then I flip and I realize the whole thing is wrong, I've wasted all that time doing that line. Although it's not a huge amount of work to draw that single line. But later on when we get into character drawing, you're going to have characters that could take you 10-15 minutes to draw a single drawing of it. And that's 10-15 minutes of your life wasted if you do it wrong. Right? So you have to start to equate the amount of effort that you put into it and the amount of time that you put into it, whether you're going to waste your time or make it work successfully by simply thinking you're drawing through.